Okay, I just did a short 1 minute video on the consequences to the states and their ability to tax income as a result of their allowing the Federal Reserve Bank to invade America and replace United States dollars, legal tender, gold and silver coin, with Federal Reserve notes. So, why don't we go through this so that everyone can understand the consequences to the state's ability to raise revenue that has been catastrophically undermined by their foolishly allowing the Federal Reserve Bank to establish Federal Reserve notes as legal tender in the 50 states rather than only the gold and silver coin called for by the Constitution. So, why don't we take a look at this? Title 12, Section 411, issuance to reserve banks, nature of obligation and redemption. Right here, Federal Reserve notes to be issued at the discretion of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System for the purpose of making advances to the Federal Reserve banks through the Federal Reserve agents as hereinafter set forth for no other purpose are authorized. The said notes shall be obligations of the United States. That's right here. The said note shall be obligations of the United States and shall be receivable by all national and member banks and Federal Reserve banks and for all taxes, customs, and other public dues. Now that means federal taxes when it says for all taxes because the United States Code can't dictate anything to the states about state taxes. So it makes Federal Reserve notes obligations of the United States and you can use them to pay federal tax. Title 31, Section Code 5103, legal tender, United States coins and currency, including Federal Reserve notes and circulating notes of Federal Reserve banks and national banks, are legal tender for all debts, public charges, taxes, and dues. Foreign gold and silver coins are not legal tender for debts. Now, this statute, of course, is unconstitutional. The Congress is not given any constitutional authority to declare a legal tender. And this statute, trying to make Federal Reserve debt notes a legal tender in payment of debts, is 100% unconstitutional. The Constitution provides that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a legal tender in payment of debt. And you may say, oh, that prohibits the states, but not the federal government. Yeah, but you see, that's not the way the Constitution works. The Constitution works so that the federal government can only do that which it is authorized to do. And the states are prohibited from doing what they cannot. But this is a power that is both prohibited to the states for their exercise and never granted to the federal government for it to exercise. And as such, the power of legal tender, not being given to the federal government and being specifically prohibited to the states, is retained by we the people, so that the only two parties that have anything to say about what will be acceptable exchange in any transaction are the two parties party to it. So if I'll take gunpowder and bullets and you'll take furs, we can cut a deal and neither party can claim they weren't paid in legal tender, because legal tender isn't a power given to the states and it's not a power granted to the federal government. The only two people that can decide how a transaction will be paid are the two people party to it. And this is specifically done so that one party can't come back later on in court complaining that they weren't paid in the state's legal tender. You took the gunpowder and the bullets, or you took the furs, whichever party is complaining. So you can't come back now and claim you weren't paid. So this statute is unconstitutional, but it makes Federal Reserve notes legal tender. And as you recall, the Federal Reserve notes were obligations of the United States. Section 30, Title 31, Section 3124, exemption from taxation. Stocks and obligations of the United States government are exempt from taxation by a state or a political subdivision of a state. Again, stocks and obligations of the United States government are exempt from taxation, but Federal Reserve notes are obligations, and everyone gets paid in nothing but Federal Reserve notes. So because the states have allowed Federal Reserve notes to replace the United States dollar as legal tender unconstitutionally, they have been stripped of their power to tax the earnings of the people of the state. It doesn't matter what basis it's done on. Everything is transacted with and measured in Federal Reserve notes. And those are exempt from taxation by a state. So by allowing Federal Reserve notes to become the currency all across the United States and used as the legal tender that's accepted in daily transactions, being obligations of the United States, the 50 states have lost the power to tax anything that occurs in the 50 states because it's all measured in Federal Reserve notes, and those are obligations of the United States which are exempt from taxation under 3124. Now, this is the consequences to the ignorance of the states allowing the private bank, the private corporate bank, the Federal Reserve, to invade the United States and set up a legal tender system outside of the Constitution and thus outside of the state's authority to tax. Because it's all done on a debt-based system and obligations of the United States that renders the states 100% impotent. Which, of course, is the intent, isn't it? To remove all power from localized government and centralize it in the hands of one central government that dictates everything from economic policy to food and energy policies. Oh, here's one. Title 12, Section 531, exempt from taxation. Federal Reserve banks, including the capital stock and surplus therein and the income derived therefrom, shall be exempt from federal, state, and local taxation except taxes upon real estate. So the bankers buy the money for 5 cents a note, 4 to 5 cents a note, $100 bills, and lend it back to the government at full face value, not at the 4 cents it cost them to buy it. And they owed the interest, and none of it is taxable to the Federal Reserve Bank. They've never been audited. They've never paid a dime in tax. Their debt notes are the legal tender. The states can't tax the obligations of the United States, those debt notes, and the Federal Reserve Bank is itself exempt from all taxation while it rakes in, what, $36 trillion in accumulated principal and interest across 110 years without putting a single dime, not a single penny of their own money into the program. You've been invaded and taken over surreptitiously by an economic invader who kept you distracted with World War I so that you wouldn't notice you were being economically invaded instead of you doing the military invasion of Europe. They invaded and they took over. Notes are obligations of the United States that are legal tender for debt and taxes, that are exempt from taxation of a state. The whole system is one of federal peonage script, where the money taken from your paycheck doesn't go in the Treasury to fund the government or to fund tax as required by law. It goes straight to the Federal Reserve Bank as collateral for the $35 trillion in debt owed to them by Congress through this unconstitutional monetary system, or lack of monetary system, that strips the states of their power to tax and raise revenue in their own territory, in their own state, from their own people. And thus the unintended consequences of the private bank will destroy the state governments soon if they don't wake up and do something about this with the American people. And probably Donald Trump, huh? Don't you think? Maybe? Yeah, I think maybe.